ChannelPro Weekly returns with fellow podcaster Dave Sobel joining as our guest to share some sound advice on how to filter the noise and zero in on what truly matters, what's going on with all the industry layoffs, and much more. It's ChannelPro Weekly number 259, Avalanche of Cash. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode number 259. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor for the ChannelPro Network, and your host for this fine show for you. And who are you? You are the VARs, the MSPs, the IT integrators, the IT consultants, those channel folks that devise and implement and monitor technology solutions for other businesses. If that sounds like you, you are in the right place. If that does not sound like you, stick around and learn. You might have a career change in order for you. Now, the first thing I know that you're thinking is, have I gone into a time warp and went back in time to the year 2022 or early 2023? And the answer is no, it is actually 2024. And yes, this is an actual new episode of ChannelPro Weekly, which we are excited to bring back. So for our longtime subscribers who've kind of held onto us into their feed there, after my former co-host and channel partner and still good friend, Rich Freeman, moved on to new projects and new ventures. A lot of change happened at ChannelPro, and we had to shut down the show for a little while to regroup. And there's been a lot of change at ChannelPro, a lot of new faces, new websites, new drive, new directive, but all things that are designed to try and make ChannelPro a more valuable resource for you. So lots of things to talk about. You'll learn a lot about these things as we go on through the show. But the goal here is to bring back ChannelPro Weekly on a weekly basis. We're going to try. I can't promise it'll be weekly. I can only promise that an episode will be released within one of the 52 weeks of the year, and hopefully more than one out of 52. We aim for a lot more than that, ideally weekly, but we will just see how it goes. But give us a little bit of a break as we ramp things back up. As far as the new ChannelPro Weekly is concerned, it's going to be a lot of what you used to love. A little bit shorter, though. It's just me as your host now. And I plan to bring on a guest host or a panel of guests to talk about any relevant topic to the channel, maybe something that's big that's happening in the news, or give some good thought leadership advice. We'll dive into different various topics. It's going to change up a little bit week to week, but it is aimed to be a little bit of a shorter show than it used to be. We'll still do some interviews. We'll still have some fun. We're still going to retain a lot of the things that made ChannelPro Weekly what it was, just in a little bit more of a bite-sized format. So with that, I'm excited to kick off our return episode, but I thought prudent to bring back one of our former frequent guest hosts, who is also a fellow podcaster, I might add. He's the Senior Director of Marketing for MSP Radio. He's also a leading expert on IT and managed services, cloud computing, virtualization, and is a featured speaker at many, many industry events. Please welcome Dave Sobel. Welcome, Dave.
Matt, it's so good to be back. Glad you're bringing the show back, and I'm really honored to be here to help you kickstart this and get it going again.
Oh, that's awesome. You were definitely on my short list of people to bring back for the first one. I love MSP Radio. I try to catch as many episodes of it as I can, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get going here. But yeah, I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be doing this again. Feels kind of weird. Well, this is the chair I sit in every day when I work, but it's a different feeling when you're kind of doing this, and I've missed it. I'm probably going to be a little rusty. Not quite as polished as you, who do an episode, as you said, 7 days a week now. How many episodes? So explain your show schedule to me.
Yeah, so the Business Tech is, of course, focused or designed to be a roughly 10-minute or so daily news podcast. So you can get sort of insights into what's going on. And I always do a segment, Why Do We Care? So that's the business days. We additionally do a live show on Wednesdays. So you can actually attend, ask questions, interact with the audience. That's on Wednesdays. We broadcast generally 3 p.m. Eastern on YouTube and LinkedIn. And then, of course, then that drops on the podcast feed if you couldn't catch it. So you can catch the audio version of that. And then I do an interview every week. So I'm trying to talk to people to get additional insights into various topics. We talk, of course, AI, cybersecurity, but generally faces you haven't necessarily heard. I'm going farther afield to find people, and that's the 7th show of the week. So you've always got a little bit of dose of new knowledge that you can dive in and out of, whatever's appropriate for you and your schedule.
Oh, that's awesome. And it is a great show. I highly recommend it. And we're actually going to talk about podcasts in general, because I know, of course, I'd recommend ours and yours, but we're going to get some other podcast picks of resources that you might want to recommend. But I want to kind of kick off the conversation here, Dave, first by giving you an opportunity just to tell us a little bit more about you. I know you kind of talked about the Business Tech a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about you.
Well, I mean, it's how far back do you want to go on this story, right? Like,
When he
I
was a
get
wee lad in the Isles of Ireland. Yeah.
right. But people like I always sort of start the career version of my story by saying, like, look, I graduated with a degree in computer science. And if you'd asked the college version of me, I'd be a product person now, like either, running product groups or product teams. And my early career was consulting and product development and that kind of stuff. But when I wrote a couple of startups up and down in the late 90s, and when the last one crashed and burned, my lesson that I took away was, the bosses get to keep their jobs. And I bet I could run a company into a wall just as good as those guys could, right? And so that was my first business was launching something to take out on my own. And I had that moment of, do I do product? Do I do services? And as anybody in this space knows, ramping up a services business is easier than ramping up a product business. And I took the services route and launched what we now call a managed services provider. And I did that for about a decade. It was a great business, loved doing it, and but I always talk about it being moderately successful. It was a $1.4 million service provider, 14 staff at its largest. I wasn't a 10 or $20 million solution provider. I had a modest exit, sold it to another provider, so it wasn't like a private equity exit or any of those kinds of crazy things. And then when I sold, I had the opportunity to go work for some vendors. I worked for a company called Level Platforms for about 2 years. That anybody who's been around for a while remembers. I helped grow the community group for that organization. We sold, of course, to AVG. And then I needed another job, so I went and worked for a little company called GFI, which rebranded as Logic Now and became SolarWinds MSP when they got bought by SolarWinds. And I had a 6-year run at that organization, 3 years pre-IPO and 3 years post, and learned a ton. Like that was, again, my role laid in community, partner education. I did a lot of like European distribution marketing that people didn't know about. Like, that wasn't the thing I told the channel as much about. But I did that too. I had a whole bunch of different like involvement in some of the M&A activities. Like I did this different stuff. And when I knew it was a time for another leap and do something else, I said, you can see this trend of like, Dave keeps jumping to new ideas. And I said, I think I can take all of the stuff that I've done in being a solution provider and being a vendor and bring that experience in education in a really different way. And I looked and I said, I think I can do something interesting in kind of analysis and news and trends and break down what I was doing to partners by flying around and trying to teach everybody in classes and instead do it digitally. And here I am 5 years later with the podcast and the YouTube channel and the newsletters and all the various components that go around with it. I'm pretty proud of being like, the number one MSP focused podcast in the space.
It's fantastic, and it's a valuable resource, for sure. You were talking about your days at GFI. I remember when they were going through their rebranding, GFI it seemed like they were rebranding every week.
Oh, internally we had a joke that it was every year. That every year we had a new brand. You would get new swag and new. One year it was just color changes. They went from red to blue. That was a simple one. And then every other times it's like, oh, we got new names. Oh, we got a new banner. Like it was just kind of one of those things that we were always working on that messaging.
Yeah, that was funny back in the day for sure. I always remember we were having to change stuff on the site all the time because they're like, oh, what brand are they going to be? What are they calling themselves this
What do
week?
they call themselves this week?
So you provide a pretty amazing service in terms of education with the podcast, but there's so much out there, and you have this uncanny ability to kind of put your finger on all of the important topics that are kind of going on in the industry, all kind of on your own. What are some of the valuable resources and outlets that you turn to kind of get that? And more importantly, how does an MSP filter out what's important and what's not important? How can the average MSP keep up to date on what's going out there? How do they deal with that massive amount of information?
Well, it's really hard, right? By the way, so you've in a way you've literally pointed like, yeah, that's the reason I think I exist now as a business and a company is to offer that service. But let me give you some insight into the way my brain works around that, and to help MSPs saying like, hey, if you want to do it on your own, like this is the way you put together a bit of a system around that. You have to be kind of intentional about being on top of things. I don't mind saying I am a news junkie. Like, I've always been one of those people that loves to read, likes to keep up on top of things. And so I've been very deliberate and systematic about the way that I do that. So I'll give you a little bit of insight into the way that it's done. Like, I filter everything in through an RSS reader, right? So that everything goes into a bucket that I can do analysis on. I have people like tools. I happen to use Feedly. I'm not hung up on which tool you use, right? I just will tell you, I use that one. And I'm reading, somewhere on the order of 500 or 600 sources every day to try and do that. And I keep adding. Like, now, but I can tell you my current 2 projects is to be way better about reading, parsing press releases. And I'm additionally working on foreign language stuff. Like, I'm trying to be able to track, I track all the channel publications in all the English speaking countries, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa. Like, I read all theirs. And then now I'm adding like Germany and France, like in a systematic way to keep those on. So the guidance I would give to somebody is you need to be systematic about picking good sources that are relevant to you in your business. And I don't want you to over rotate too much on technology news. In fact, I want you to shoot in sources that are related to the industries that you serve. Let me give you an example. So for me, I tend to like delving into healthcare as an education as 2 markets that I like to keep track of. They're big portions of the economy, right? So as a broad generalist, I'm trying to keep an eye on that. So I read a bunch of different publications that are focused on doctors and are focused on educators that are about how they do their job. Right. And I freely admit, I'm not necessarily reading all this stuff to be a deep expert. What I'm doing is just to try and read and get a sense of that. Like, oh, look, the doctors are all talking about AI. Right, like I'm reading their publications. They are talking, but you know what? They didn't spend a bunch of time talking about blockchain or crypto. Like, that stuff didn't hit their publications very much, and that helps you get a sense of what your customers, MSP that's listening to us, is thinking about. And that for me is kind of the way that I put my mind on it. Is like, well, hey, if I'm trying to get in the headspace of the people that I want to add value to, what are they reading and what do they need to keep up with?
So do you actually, like you said, you track 500, 600 different sources? I don't think that's probably feasible for any MSP to actually do. But are you actually like reading all of the articles from all of these sources? Like, do you spend like 17 hours a day reading and not sleeping, or?
So no and yes. So actually, one of the things I like about Feedly is it actually does some AI work for me and actually clusters story groups. Like, it'll actually sort of say, like, these 10 publications all wrote a story about this, and here you get them together, right? So you get some, so that's helping me do that. I'm reading the headlines in the first few lines of just about everything that I do. Like, about all of those sources. So it's a matter of going through and saying, like, oh, okay, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good. And my first pass, like, I mean, it's my morning coffee. I sit down with my coffee in the morning and I sit down with Feedly and I'm start going through and I go, okay, here are the ones that I'm in, and here's the one I'm interested in. I go through all those sources. And at the end, it's like, well, here's the 50 or 60 news articles that I'm going to spend more time on.
Gotcha. So you
And
kind of do you do a quick pass, and then you use the AI to kind of filter down and clump trends or
right,
whatever, and then
exactly.
you're.
So I'm using tools to clump it and to get some insight into it and pull it all together and go, like, oh, this was a thing. I got a lot of these, and this one wasn't. But the trick there is you're also balancing to make sure you don't get something interesting doesn't get lost, right? You don't want to only do the big things. You got to make sure you're scanning everything to find the little ones that didn't quite get the same attention. But yeah, that's the basic idea. Skim through it, do a first pass. These are the 50 or so that I really like. Those give you a little insight into the way I work. Those get thrown into a database. That gets then another AI pass goes through there and actually summarizes everything for me, so that I can go, like, I can actually do a little bit more deep dive to say, like, oh, okay, now I see what these articles are all about. I can spend more time reading in depth the 40 or so that make the cut of things that I'm interested in, and then I start saying, okay, can I group these into topics? Like, do they fit a rhythm? Maybe I want to talk about security and a trend, all the pieces I'm going. So I start clustering them by topic and by group, And it's interesting to me that for me, it always sort of flows naturally that all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I see how these things go together. It become obvious to me the things I want to talk about. And then maybe it's just the rhythm of I've done it so much.
Yeah. So what are the topics do you think that are important for MSPs to really focus on? Because maybe not necessarily always high level business stuff, but should they be tracking, their vendor press releases, or should they be tracking high, you said something about interviews. What's if they were going to focus in on two or three areas of like this is stuff that you really need to be on top of, what would those things be?
Yeah. So I think it would sort of fall into uh kind of three buckets. I don't mind saying my own biases to this, but these are the things I'm looking at. I think you want to look at the stuff. This is the stuff that affects my customers in that it is an opportunity to do something to help them, to give them guidance. And that's broad technology strokes. Like the reason I'm interested in AI as much as I am is like there's a ton of cool use cases that we can go help customers with interesting problems. Right. So, I circle that one and go, yeah, that's something. You've got then another bucket of stories which are kind of related to the vendors. Like, what are the vendors that you work with doing just to keep an eye on? But I will tell you, don't worry too much because that doesn't move nearly as fast as most people think. Right? Like you don't have to do that daily. It's okay if you're just checking in with that periodically on a regular basis to make sure you know what their moves are. Because by the way, they will be happy to tell you if you want to sit down and need a little help. And then the final thing is that I don't necessarily know that enough MSPs spend time here, is I think it's around the regulation and the compliance landscape. Like there's just so much going on, particularly right now, when it comes to that whole legislative approach to everything. And you've got to keep an eye on things for your geography, for your industries, for any of the technologies that you leverage. Like I think you need to be systematic about trying to keep an eye on that. And by the way, you got to remember, you got to check on the Fed and you got to check at your state level too. And you got to check on any states your customers might do business in too. Like, and by the way, just throwing a wrinkle of like, this is a global world, so you might need to keep up with what the EU is doing too, because your customers may be doing business there. So I would tell you, like, it's being systematic about that too is part of what you're going to have to do to keep up.
God, just the compliance and regulation standpoint alone, which is drastically becoming much more complicated and busy. That just that alone, keeping up with that alone has got to be
Oh,
difficult.
it's a huge thing. Now, and I say this over and over again, I think it's important to reinforce. We like complicated problems. Complicated problems are good. We can charge customers more to solve them. So don't necessarily go running from something because it seems complicated and I can't do it. Know that complexity is good and bringing systematic approaches to complex problems is a high value service that your customers need. Last I checked, everybody needs to, not break the law, right? There are actual issues if you get into trouble here. So putting time and energy into that in a systematic way, very good for your bottom line, but it has to be deliberate.
Right, right. So that's an area where MSPs probably need to sharpen their skills a little bit on solving complicated problems like that and keeping up with those resources that'll kind of guide them to that. The angle of having to keep up with the industries that your customers are in is interesting. But yeah, I guess that's where you're going to learn about a lot of opportunities that and problems or issues that your customers are facing that you can maybe step in with. But that's
Well,
just even more to
absolutely.
keep up with, right?
And you're always looking for a way to differentiate yourself, right? And if you want to be an expert in problems that your customers have, well, you need to understand your customers. Like you have to get into that. And it's why, like, and I don't necessarily always say like you have to specialize in an industry, but it's why some providers do, and it's why they tend to see better results when they do, because they can get much closer to giving real outcomes that are based around their customers' needs and can tie that back specifically to their customers' businesses. I quip all the time. Like I can go get anytime I can go to a customer and I can talk and say, "Hey, you spend $1, I'll give you $1.25 back." The cash machine opens up and the avalanche of cash rolls into my business, right? Anytime I can directly do that. Now, I'm not saying it's always easy, But when you're spending your time thinking about, hey, you've got a problem around billing, and if I can help you with the efficiency of that, we can put 2 times as many customers through your machine of your business by putting technology around that. Spend a buck, you're going to get two. That business owner is going to totally do that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So from your perspective, you have your finger on the pulse of a lot of things, and as well as trends too. I think you're very good at kind of seeing what is changing in the landscape out there, and looking at what MSPs need to know and what they need to do. What are some of the skills that you think an SMB focused MSP is going to need in the near future that they may not have today?
The number one skill that I think about all the time for an MSP right now is that business analyst skill. The ability to do what I just talked about, being able to work with a customer, talk about their business, relate it back to their customer's P&L, the profit and loss statement, and how they drive revenue, how they manage costs, and how they drive profit. Like being able to do that work is a non-technical skill, and for many, myself included, who came up with a technical background, we're not used necessarily to thinking about that. We may not have taken enough business classes in college, or we didn't, like we didn't spend our career doing that kind of business analysis. And more than anything, that's the real valuable skill right now. I love what we do from a technical perspective, but I can tell you that it is not nearly as complicated nor as requiring of a wrench or a screwdriver as it used to. We talk a lot about monitoring and management and hardware infrastructures and all that kind of stuff, but if we really, really critically think about this, a lot of stuff doesn't break. Like it just doesn't really break the way that it did. Now, I'm not going to say it's perfect. I am well aware of help desks and the ability of users to do that. But I'm just saying, if I look at this broad trend wise, we don't spend a lot of time on things that were significant issues a decade ago. And that's okay. That's good. But what that's also mean is there's a bunch of stuff that we don't need to spend as much of our time on. And our customers want us thinking much more about their business, particularly for those small and mid-sized customers that don't have infinite IT budgets. Look, nobody's IT budget is infinite. I get it. But a Fortune 500 company has a lot of money to put in all the various problems they have. An SMB only has so much, right? And they're going to only be able to deploy it on a number of different things. And some of them have to drive some revenue.
And so which one of those things do you think would be important for one of their SMB customers? If they were only going to invest in three areas, what would they be?
Look, I'd be
Or what would you
irresponsible.
push? I should
I'd
say.
be irresponsible if I didn't say cybersecurity, right? But what I also want to say is it is not an infinite pile of tools and solutions around cybersecurity. I think you need to be good at the basic hygiene, and you need to be really good at the basic hygiene. And I said it twice for a reason. The basics of patching, backup, and authentication management, being multi-factor, all that kind of stuff, like that's really hard to do really well, particularly the more people you add. And if you spend a lot of time there, you get a lot of bang for your buck. And I had then the fourth pillar of, and be ready for when, S hits the wall. And because it's going to. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And having a plan, an actual organized plan, is a good one. So that's the first thing is you need to get the basics ready to deal with the actual world we live in. The second is I think you want to be focused on the business productivity layer, right? Like I think you need to figure out how businesses run their business and what that means. And that could be, more than just making sure email and calendaring works. You talk to a lot of, when I go talk to end customers and I talk to small customers, I find that most of them will say, oh yeah, I've got Microsoft 365. Like I'm totally in on that. And you're like, okay, well, what are you using? Well, email and maybe a little bit of OneDrive. And I'm like, but you're not using all of the other components? Like, how about workflows? How about, how about fully integrating Teams? How about data analytics? How about all of the stuff that and all of that they already pay for, yet they don't use? Well, that's because you got to do the business process stuff to make sure that it's effective, right? And then the third bit is the one where I get a little bit specialized, say, yeah, this is the bit where you're going to be really effective within your customer's industry, right? And whether or not that means something like I'm getting really good at AI analytics and helping businesses be better there, or I'm helping with a line of business application and I want to make sure that they are like really good at it. Again, I spend a little bit more time on healthcare because it's an interesting area and a lot of money in there. But like things like, their medical record systems, their image processing systems, like being not just good at keeping it alive, but actually helping them be effective in using it. I'd put it into those three buckets.
Yeah, very very insightful, very interesting. So we've got a few more minutes left in this segment. As a podcaster, clearly, if I was going to ask you to recommend some podcasts, I would hope that you would recommend your own. I would for certain, and of course, I would recommend ours. But what are few other podcasts out there that Dave Sobel is a fan of and would recommend others listen to as well?
It's funny because people ask me this all the time, and I'll say, like, actually, I have kind of three buckets of podcasts, right? So I've got a number of things that I do daily for like keeping up with news, and there's actually a bit of rotation in there. I don't mind saying I'll freshen it up and get different voices in there. I don't spend a ton of time listening to a ton of other channel podcasts. I don't mind, like I'll say, like, and I do a little bit in general news and other like big idea topics. I love listening to I'm a big fan of Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher. I listen to Pivot and I listen to Prof G. I do it a lot because I like their guests, and I'm looking for ideas that are outside of our space. And I like hearing discussions around trends that I may not have thought of. And I don't mind saying I've got a bucket of things that are just for silliness. I'm a big retro video game guy, as anybody knows, and I have like three or four that I make sure I listen to so that my brain gets an opportunity to do something fun and think creatively. So I would sort of tell everybody, like, have a little bit of a bucket of different rotations to give your brain different insights.
Wow, I love it. And I know you are a retro gamer. Clearly, you and I have something in common. If you
Very much so.
if you look at the shelf behind me there, so yeah, that's all. That's great advice. Some good recommendations there on different ways to consume podcasts. So good to tickle all lobes of the brain with various things, including, of course, but of course, you should subscribe to MSP Radio as well as Channel Per Weekly, because if you need your channel news and fix, we're a good place to go. So Dave, awesome stuff. We're gonna take a short break. When we come back, we're gonna go back in time, not literally, but we're gonna do a museum pick, if you will. One of the things that I like about having Dave on is that he has lots of fun, cool gadgets that he plays with and can speak to. So I'm gonna turn over the museum pick to him, and we'll learn about something cool that he's got, and it's a good one. So stick around. We will be right back. And welcome back to this segment of Channel Pro Weekly. For those who've been subscribers for a long time or caught the show in the past, we used to do what we call a museum pick. As most people know, I have a large assortment of technology from way back in the day, and over the course of 200 plus episodes, we somewhat exhausted my list of museum items that were interesting to talk about, unless we want to talk about a various network card or something every week, but that would get a little old. Although I will say I do have some stuff that has now earned museum status, so I'll have some new picks to share. But one of the reasons why I love having Dave on is because he loves old gadgets, and he loves playing with stuff just about as much as I do. And Dave has a fun museum pick. What have you brought, Dave?
Well, admittedly, it's not old, but
Well,
it
it's not
is
old, but it's
cool.
interesting, right?
So I brought my Flipper Zero. And if you're not aware of this little thing, it is distinctly a hacker toy. You have to jump through a couple of hoops even to order one, because they're not broadly available, but it comes with all kinds of various sensors and scanners to allow you to do that. One of the things that I love doing is playing with it is the NFC reader. You can actually read the microchip in your pet, which is one of those interesting, wacky things. So that I actually verified, is like, well, did they really actually put one in there? And you can scan that. You can use it on garage door openers. You can use it on those exit ramps, gates. You can use it in all kinds of crazy ways. And it's one of those things where, if you don't even decide to buy one, I would tell providers to take a look at what it can do, because it really gives you a lot of thinking on oh wow, there's a lot of technology that we think about all the time every day that is actually incredibly insecure. that there is a very little actual authentication that goes on in terms of what it's doing, including things like key fobs for your car. And I think it's really interesting to sort of delve into that. That's why I picked it up, was more just like not to become an expert in it, but more to like keep an eye on what it's capable of doing. And I'll tell you, as a provider, this is one that you should keep an eye on.
So what are a couple of the things that it can do that surprised you, that you now think about or talk about, for people to like lock down or
Well,
consider in their
its ability to mess with cars is surprising. Is very surprising, because you have this natural thinking of, hey, when I have a key for my car that is unique and can't be hacked. Well, because we've gone wireless in such a way that it is not entirely secure, it made me think a lot about that kind of physical security, particularly when we also think about things like parking garage gates, or bad scanners that can be easily replicated. Like, there's a lot of things there that where, because it's so easy to get access to the technology now, things that used to be difficult are now quite easy. And we probably ought to be looking at actual upgrades that include cryptography. So those kinds of things, like thinking about being able to scan badges, being able to scan access points, doorways, and cars, were the areas that I was like, okay, that's real. And then when you go out and play with it a little bit on your own, you get super terrified of what the thing can do.
have you caused any mischief with yours yet?
I have not, only within the house, only mischief on myself, trying to be a good, diligent technologist when it comes to this stuff.
So if somebody wanted to get one of those, you said it's a process or difficult. What do those
You
things
can order
run,
them
and where do they
online.
get them?
You can order them online at different times. They may or may not have import restrictions, depending on where you are listening from. So that's the reason that I allude to that, is that there are some, that at times there are import restrictions on the device and the availability of it as well. But it's definitely worth playing with.
Definitely worth checking out. Very interesting tech pick to talk about. So thank you for bringing that on. So Dave, we're gonna go into our news segment. So folks who have been longtime listeners, we used to be very news heavy on ChannelPro Weekly. I think we're gonna be switching to be a little less news heavy going forward. We'll talk about some of the headlines that are hitting the site, because we want you to be aware of some of those and to go and check some of those out. But we're not going to dive into every story very, very deeply the way we used to, because that was something that Rich was very good at, and it's something that I'm not very good at. So we will lean forward into my strengths, and not try to do my best Rich impersonation. So although Dave, you do a very good Rich impersonation from what I understand.
Well, not with the voice as much, but I do try and think like Rich, and I read all his stuff, so I appreciate that.
Shout out to former co-host Rich Freeman for that. So we've got a couple things. So one thing that, Dave, that I did want to ask you about that we have been seeing in the news lately, is some layoffs. So ConnectWise announced that they're doing some layoffs. Intel's been doing some layoffs, and there's been other companies. Google, I think, is doing some layoffs. A lot of layoffs right now in the tech industry. I don't want to get into like the gaming industry, because that's been a job bloodbath
That's
in
its own
the
thing.
in the gaming industry, and that there's lots of reasons for that. But are we seeing any trends here in terms of layoffs in the IT space? Is there more coming, do you think? What's the factor behind some of these?
I'd be inclined to think that just about every company is going to have taken a look and see if they need to do a reduction in force. Because, and I think it's two major factors. The first was, I think they kind of bulked up during the pandemic a little too much. And I think a lot of CEOs are realizing that that was kind of a bit of a mistake. The second thing is, and I don't spend a ton of time talking about it, but I think this is a particular impact. Elon Musk purchasing Twitter and reducing the force by about 80% sent a pretty clear signal to CEOs that they could probably get away with having less people. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, it was, we could have a whole, I don't want to have a whole argument around Elon or Twitter or anything like that, but I think the insight there is that he went really hard on that. And most other CEOs probably looked and said, oh, I could probably do that. And if I only did 10%, I'm probably going to be just fine and retain profits. And I think it's kind of that. And it created a culture where there's a bit of cover for everyone going, well, okay, like, Elon did it big. We can all do it. layoffs are one of those topics where, where I want to present both sides of this. Like, it is a horrific, horrible thing to do, and oftentimes incredibly necessary for the business in order to maintain the business growth over time. You have to balance both. And I think, the advice that I would give to any listener here is to know that you will at times consider that you may have to do that. Do it earlier and be more generous, be as generous as you possibly can, and then only do it once. that is the best way to do that, and to navigate that. For if you're worried about your vendors, I don't think that there's any reason to worry about that. I don't think that there are particular ones. In particular, you just mentioned, like, for example, ConnectWise was not a particularly large layoff. We don't exactly have the numbers there, but it does not feel like it is a massive one. It looks like just an opportunity to do some trimming. And by the way, they've done some acquisitions, so they probably have duplicated headcount. I don't think it's something to panic about.
Okay, that's good. It's just I know we've seen a lot of stories recently, so it's good to get your insight that maybe it's not something that's going to be a massive thing, but it's something to keep an eye on going forward. So very, very good. I want to mention a couple other headlines, stories that we got on the channelpronetwork.com website. By the way, it is a new website, channelpronetwork.com. If you haven't been there in a while, I encourage you to go there, check it out. In fact, set it as your homepage, bookmark it, go there every day. We've got news stories and white papers and press releases, all kinds of stuff going out there all the time. Whole new look and feel. It's nice and fast. Go and make sure you check that out. We got a couple stories that I want to point out. One, we did a story on Copilot for Microsoft 365 and why it's a golden opportunity for MSPs. That's one that I wrote up. So I'm being a little selfish here, pointing people to my own stories. But Dave, it's my show. I'm allowed to do that.
You can do whatever you want, Matt.
But it actually is a really good story. I interviewed a lot of good people for that one. And it's something that folks, if you're not playing around or trying to push Copilot on your customers, I really encourage you to read that and get some of those insights there. We've got another article on why MSPs don't grow and what you can do to change that. So that's an article that we got on the site there. We also covered Broadcom and the VMware acquisition, merger, whatever that was. But that has some big, broader channel implications. So I encourage you to go and check out that story. And we also have another one on tackling tech firms' regulatory hurdles that can drive a brighter future for MSPs. So that story is on the site. You should go and check that one out. So if any of those headlines pique your interest, we got that and a whole lot more on the site there. But I'll put links to those individual stories in the show notes section. So if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Go ahead, do it. Oh, we'll wait for you. Just press it. Go ahead. Right now, good, and then the bell, and then I don't know. YouTube makes you do a million things to get notifications these days, but do all those things, so that way you get notified when there's new episodes of Channel Pro Weekly. So hit that. But if you open up the show notes there, we'll put all those links in there for you to go back and check out the site. If you're listening through your favorite podcast service, whatever it would be, go ahead and give us a good rating. Really appreciate that. If you're not subscribed, please go ahead and do that. So that way you get notifications of new episodes there as well. If you like to listen along, I'd love to have all of you. Dave, anything going on in the news that you want to mention?
I think you've covered most of the major ones. That Broadcom stuff continues to be very interesting. The EU just got involved, so we'll have to all keep an eye on that one to see how it turns out.
Yeah, it was like, oh, that's another acquisition, but that story is getting juicier and juicier by the day. So
it's certainly, if you like a little bit of drama, that is a great story to be tracking.
Absolutely. So very good. So go and check all of those out. I also want to say that we've got some events coming up. As you know, Channel Pro does a whole series of regional events, all new for 2024. It's called Channel Pro Live. We've got 7 of those that we're doing around the country. The next coming up is in Baltimore. We've already done Chicago in March, and we just finished up our Orlando event, or show up our live event in Orlando. Shocker where it was when I just said the word Orlando, but that was good. And we got Baltimore coming up on May 15th and May 16th. Go to events.channelpronetwork.com to learn a little bit more about that and to register. It's free for all qualified MSPs and IT professionals. So make sure that you go and do that. But join us. You're going to learn a lot. We've got great sessions. We're talking some about AI, and we've got I don't have the whole agenda up, but we've got other sessions on growing margins and being more profitable, keeping up with a lot of great guest speakers, kind of wrapped over 2 days. It's got some pre-day, what we call pre-day sessions. We've got like a business workshop with various business coaches. So you're going to be learning about some of that stuff. Awesome stuff. And for those who can't travel to Baltimore or any of the other events we've got coming up, and I should probably mention what some of those are. We've got events. You see, Dave, you'd think I would have been prepared with this, but I was
You're just
not.
restretching those podcast legs. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
you know, I'm going to be a little rusty, and that's okay. I think we can. Everyone will give me a little bit of a forgiveness here for being a little rusty. But we got Baltimore in May. We're going to Columbus, Ohio, new location for Channel Pro. In June, so that's June 5th and 6th. We're going to be in Charlotte in September, Dallas in October, and LA in November. And I also want to mention we also have a new type of event that Channel Pro Weekly listeners, if you haven't kept up with what Channel Pro is up to, we have a brand new event that we started last year. It's a cybersecurity focused event called Channel Pro Defend. We did it in LA last November, and it was a smashing success. So we were doing it again. This year, we're moving it to the East Coast. It's going to be in Island, New Jersey in August. That's a 2-day cybersecurity bonanza, breakout sessions, all kinds of valuable information. We had like real-time hacking demos last year. Just really, really cool stuff. It's an awesome, awesome event. If there's any event you're gonna go to this year, make sure you plan to go to that one, travel to it. We have some registration benefits. I think there's a way you can get a hotel room, I believe, and some other stuff. So you just go to events.channelpronetwork.com, and then you can go and you get all the information on those events. But make sure you do and check those out. For those who can't travel, though, we do have some digital events coming up. May 22nd, we're doing our online deep dive, which is bundling and pricing managed services. So new format for our digital events, much shorter duration, but we try to cram as much as we can into these short kind of things. We also have a product kind of vendor focused kind of event that we've been doing. That one, the first one we did was called the Channel Pro Product Roundup. That's the one that I host. We did one that was around kind of driving MSP profits using certain products. And we have another one coming up later in the year, but I'll share a little bit more about that one as we get close to it. But a few different other virtual events for you to go and check out. And again, those are also, of course, free for you to attend. So make sure you go events.channelpronetwork.com and check those out. And of course, visit our website at www.channelpronetwork.com. Dave, thank you so much for being on and joining me for this inaugural kickoff. I don't know. I keep using the word inaugural. I'm not really using it in the way that it means, but this return.
Reemergence. Well, welcome back to podcasting, Matt. It's nice to have you back.
Right. It's good to be back, and I'm glad everybody's still who stayed subscribed is excited to have a little bit of Channel Pro Weekly back with us each and every week. So Dave, for those who want to learn more about the business of tech, more about your podcasts and that you do, or any of the resources you provide, where can they go? How can they get in touch with you?
It's super easy. Everything is at businessof.tech. That's the website. There's a big blue subscribe button there. You can find me on YouTube, on your favorite podcatcher. I do a daily version if you want to catch all my news stories, a weekly version of the newsletter if you want to get the interview stuff. Lots of different ways, all the easy ways for you to engage. And I would encourage you, if you're a podcast listener, make sure to follow the show, The Business of Tech, on all of the major podcast platforms.
Awesome. And I encourage folks to do that as well. And Dave, thank you so much for being on with me. And of course, we will plan to have you on again sometime down the road.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. But folks, and of course, when we're talking about subscribing to podcasts, of course, subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly. It's hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. We have a video version on YouTube if you like to watch. If you just like to listen, just make sure you subscribe in your favorite podcast feed. We're in all of them: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. I don't know if Google does podcasts anymore, but we're everywhere. Just go and subscribe, and make sure if you can leave a good rating or a nice review. It always helps get people to subscribe to those. If you have any comments for us, I would love to take your suggestions for topics to cover here on the show. podcast@channelpronetwork.com is the email address. Send your thoughts, ideas, show topics that you might like to see us do, or if you think you'd be a good guest to be interviewed, you got a cool story to tell, I'm all ears, and I'll consider having you on. So send us an email to that. And of course, visit channelpronetwork.com each and every day. There you're going to find all of the various stories and articles and news and white papers and all kinds of good stuff to help you keep on top of what's going on in this crazy business, or things that will help you run your business better, because that's what we are all about at Channel Pro. So go and check those out. And with that, episode 259. I know it seems like an origin episode, but it's actually the 259th of these. And we will be back with episode 260, hopefully next week. See you then.